joined us already in advance. We can see everyone chatting away there, and that is great. Good to see you. Thanks for tuning in. Ross and Jono with you. We have been going through the 10 Commandments. And it's not just the 10 Commandments, Ross. Obviously, what we're going through is not just Exodus and Leviticus, Exodus and Deuteronomy. We will be jumping into Leviticus briefly today. But of course, all the much more ancient copies of the Decalogue that we have, including the what do we have? The Shapira scroll, of course, the Moses scroll. We have the Samaritan Pentateuch. We have the All Souls Deuteronomy. We have from Qumran. We're jumping into all of those, and we have been comparing to see the differences and that which they have in common. There are, of course, we have discovered and pointed out some significant differences in the commandments thus far.
Right.
But now we're at the end of this series, and we find ourselves in an interesting place. That is that we have a 10th commandment, or do we have an 11th commandment? This is the question. What we have been saying from the very beginning is that in Deuteronomy and in Exodus, we actually only have 9 commandments, which is a shock to a lot of people, particularly if you're just tuning in and you're watching this for the first time. There's only 9 commandments in Exodus and Deuteronomy. We call it the 10 Commandments because in 3 places in the Tanakh, it is described as such, and therefore divisions must be made in order to make it 10. Some religious traditions will divide the first into 2, and others will divide the last into 2, but you must have 10, and that's how we have 10. In actual fact, there are 9. Some, as we're going to see, the Samaritan Pentateuch has seen this, and they've gone, you know what, we need another commandment to make it 10. We're going to look at that today. And there is what is described as an additional commandment in the Moses scroll, Ross, and being reported as such, many people then just went, "Oh, there's 11 commandments in the Moses scroll." Are there 11 commandments, Ross?
There are not, Jono, and it's funny that you bring that up. I mean, we've been talking about this for quite some time. We've done other shows on this, but this thing just will not go away. This idea that Shapira's version of the 10 Commandments has 11. That started early, Jono. It started very early, as you know, 1883. As soon as the media hit, you know how some of those media outlets are. It's not new to say fake news. That stuff was going on in 1883.
That's right.
But it is an interesting thing, and all of those excellent points you brought back up, we're going to look at, and we'll look at in just a few minutes, because we both like these charts, but we couldn't make the standard chart we've been using because Shapira's manuscript stands alone with this one. So we had to do something different. In fact, we could pull this up on the screen whenever you're ready and kind of talk through it.
Go ahead.
But I tell you, it is just very, very interesting when you think about, let me see, somebody's trying to call through, and I don't know how that could possibly be. Let me check.
It's probably your mum going, "I can see you on YouTube, Ross."
Yeah, that's right. No, I should be blocked out. But anyway, so it is interesting, and we have to establish, first of all, that Exodus and Deuteronomy in our canonical text both have 9. We use the word commandments, but I think it's better to use the phrase, just like the Hebrew Bible does. Let's call them 10 things, 10 matters, 10 words.
10 words. I like 10 words.
Hadevarim. And you mentioned the 3 verses in case people don't have those. It's Exodus 34, verse 28, Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 13, and Deuteronomy 10, verse 4. All 3 of those are the text. The English typically says 10 commandments, but the Hebrew is Aseret Hadevarim, 10 words. I'm going to pull this chart up, Jono, mainly because I like it so much. Are you ready for that? Or
go ahead.
Okay, let's
give me this chart because it's good to just show people this.
Here we
very
go.
good. All right. So this is the way. This is the way it is divided in order to make the 10. Is this fair?
That's right. That's right.
All right.
And
Go
by the
ahead.
way, I adapted this chart from a chart in the Jewish Study Bible. And you and I, we've referred to this several times in various things we've done, not only this chart, but also this Bible, the Jewish Study Bible. And this is found in that Bible close to
Mm-hmm.
Deuteronomy 5's account of the 10 words. So if we just go through it quickly, look along the top. We have the word or the command. So you have 1 through 10 listed there. And then obviously columns left to right, you have Rabbinic Judaism, Hellenistic Judaism, and the church fathers agree. Then you have the Catholic Lutheran version, the Shapira Manuscript, and the Samaritan. So I tried to stick with the color codes just to make it a little bit easier to follow. So when you're
Mm-hmm.
ready, Jono, I'm
Go
going to
ahead.
take a sip of coffee and we're going to jump into this.
Okay, no, this is good. And I see. Okay, so the rabbinic and Hellenistic Judaism divide the first one into two. Well, in a slightly different way, Ross. I'm looking at
They
it here.
do.
So
Yeah,
the self-identification of God. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, right?
right.
As the first word. Remember, people will say, "Well, that's not a commandment." Okay, sure, it's not a commandment, but uh, as Ross has already pointed out, it's not described as 10 commandments in the Torah. It's described as 10 words, and they say, "Well, this is the first word of the divine." And then it goes into the prohibition against idolatry. In Hellenistic Judaism, the prohibition against idolatry is divided into two. Is that how I understand this?
Yep, that's right. That's right.
Hmm.
Now, one thing I want to throw in here, just from what you'll see a lot of times if you study this subject out, particularly in the early 20th century, 1930s, 1940s, one of the things that scholarship began to do was they began to say, hey, this Hebrew law is not so unique. In fact, we find it in other ancient Near East documents. So one of the things that they began to notice was that there were vassal treaties and so forth between a king and a people, and
Hmm.
so a lot of times they would begin to look at things like the 10 words and they'd say, hey, you know what? This reminds me of this Hittite treaty where the king, and so they identify, notice in rabbinic Judaism, self-identification of God, they
Hmm.
said that's very similar. So that's part of number one. It's because they're trying to correlate it to what they see in these other ancient Near East treaties.
Okay.
But yeah, you're right. So 1 and 2 basically represent the same material in rabbinic Judaism and Hellenistic Judaism. And then notice the similarities: false oaths, lifting the name, Shabbat,
Hmm.
parents, murder, adultery, theft, false witness, coveting. All of those line up.
Hmm.
But what I'm going to propose, what we're going to propose, is that the only way Hellenistic Judaism and Rabbinic Judaism arrived at 10 was they split what belonged as one. Is that
Hmm.
fair?
Hmm.
All right. Now, the Catholic Lutheran version, right next to it, look at that, Jono. They keep other gods and images, the worship of other images, as one. And then they look at the very bottom in the, I don't know what you call that, salmon color, maybe a little
Sure. There
salmon
you
or
go. Let's call
maybe
that salmon
orange.
color.
We call it orange, a little orange, light orange, a little sherbet color. But
Remember, boys and
notice
girls, nothing rhymes with orange.
coveting. So they split, the Catholic and Lutheran split coveting.
Mm.
And they say coveting of wife and coveting of property.
Now,
Now,
you did highlight that there was also a textual reason why they came to that
that's
conclusion.
right.
Go ahead.
That's right. Before people say, "Oh, those Catholics in their way that they twist things," the Catholics are actually following something quite interesting here,
Mm.
because in the Hebrew, in Deuteronomy in particular, there are two different words used for what is forbidden of a wife of a neighbor and the property of a neighbor. So, yeah, okay, but I still think they're splitting hairs here. And no matter how you slice it, so far, in my estimation, you only have 9 words, Jono.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Shapira is different. And the only thing close to it, notice I listed these in order. So what's interesting is not only does Shapira's manuscript have 10, but it also has things in a different order. Now, the things that I'd like to point out are that you do have this order is correct, or it aligns with what we see in the other manuscripts, the rabbinic and the Hellenistic Judaism and so forth. You have Shabbat, parents, murder, adultery, theft, false. That's it. So those 5: Shabbat, parents, murder, adultery, and theft. Is that 5?
Mm-hmm.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That aligns with what we see in the other versions. But notice that in Shapira's manuscript, Shabbat is up at number 2.
Mm-hmm.
Now I know we already covered this, but I think it's nice to look at this as it's laid out.
Mm.
Now, the other observation I would like to point out is that Shapira's manuscript, even though the order and the wording is slightly different, you do have, for the most part, the same words except for this number 10. Like we find Shabbat in all of those versions. We find honor your parents, the murder, the adultery, the theft, false oath. That would align with false oath and lifting of the name, and false witness. That aligns. Coveting. That aligns.
Mm-hmm.
So Shapira's manuscript is not like some total redo of the 10 words. It has the same things, except it actually has 10, and the 10th is don't hate your brother in your heart. We'll get to that in a moment.
We will. Before we just continue, it's worth mentioning briefly, leave that up, that there is actually a logical reason why this order appears in the Shapira text, in the Moses scroll. No idolatry, no making images for the purpose of idolatry is followed by Shabbat, because within the Shabbat commandment, God is saying, I am responsible for all of the things. I'm responsible for all of the things. There are no other gods that are responsible for the things. And there is and the word states that you shall observe the 7th day, because I created in 6 days, and I ceased on the 7th. Therefore, you shall cease on the 7th, and it becomes a memorial of monotheism, if you like, because he is responsible for all the things. It makes perfectly logical sense that it should follow on from the word not to commit idolatry. And another thing I find interesting, of course, is false oaths and false witnesses. Why should they not go together? There's clearly a connection there. And coveting and not hating your brother, you can certainly make connections there. It seems to flow. I think if we looked at them all a little bit closely and how they relate to each other as they progress, it probably makes more sense. In fact, it does to me, just looking at it, at this, than the other orders that we have available to us. Ross?
Yeah, I agree, Jono. And one of the things that I think we can touch on while we're in this subject is, there are a lot of stories that people come up with, and refrigerator magnets are a big promoter of this view, that on one of the you have 2 tablets, Jono. One of the tablets has all of the first 5, and the first 5 deal with man's relationship with God. And the second set of 5, bless God, have to do with our relationship with man, God, man to man. Now, guess where that's found in the Bible? It isn't. It's just what people say. What we do have in the Pentateuch is we do have that there are 2 tablets. What we read in the Pentateuch is that these 2 stone tablets were written on both sides, on as it says it in the Hebrew, on this and that. And so what we don't know is, A, how big were the tablets? What were they made
Mhm.
out of? I certainly don't think they're like Charlton Heston or Mel
No,
Brooks is carrying, the big tablets.
big
Uh,
gravestones.
yeah, in fact, what we do have is if we think about the ancient world, particularly around the Bronze Age, we do see like Sumerian tablets, and they're about the size of a piece of bread,
Mm,
like sandwich loaf bread.
sure.
And but we don't know. We don't know. All we know is that there were 10 matters, 10 things, 10 words that were engraved on stone, both
Mm.
sides. But we don't know anything about the order or the arrangement or any of that.
Or, if the 2 tablets had if it was just two copies, I mean, it may have been 2 copies. They may have had one tablet may have had the 10 upon them. The
Yeah,
second tablet may have just been a copy of that. That's a possibility as well, we just don't know.
that's
And then
right.
we have the Samaritan Pentateuch, Ross.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And this is also an interesting one, Jono. I think your description of it as the lead in for our talk tonight was perfect. It's as if the Samaritan Pentateuch, we often find, I know there are people who look to the Samaritan Pentateuch and think, hey, man, maybe this gets us closer to the original. But what we know, most scholars will say that the Samaritan Pentateuch has evolved. Certainly, it's split off before the late Masoretic manuscripts that we have, but there are tendencies where it sort of combines different versions too. So in the Samaritan Pentateuch, though, in the 10 words, you have a very close approximation of what you see in the Masoretic text. The only difference, the main difference, I should say,
Mm,
is that instead of stopping and splitting either the first or the last, they add the one about Grizim.
mm,
And of course, all our readers know about Mount Gerizim. Deuteronomy 11, Deuteronomy 27. Remember, Moses is interrupted by this late body of law, chapters 12 through 26, which is inserted, I believe, at a later point.
mhm,
But 11 and 27 talk about when you cross into the land, you're going to set this up and you're going to write the words of this Torah on stone and so forth. And I think it's pretty simple to realize that someone saw that we only had 10. I
mhm.
mean 9. So they add the Gerizim commandment and make it 10. You have any ideas on that as to when that
Well,
might have
that's
happened?
it
Or
is interesting. I'll be honest, I know very, very little about the Samaritan Pentateuch's 10th commandment, but it seems, what seems perfectly obvious, as you just stated, is that, at some stage they went, "You know what? There's only 9 here. This is, if we don't take advantage of this, it's an opportunity missed. Let's put something in there about Gerizim because we are championing uh, our mountain after all." And there's an enormous amount of, revisionism in revolving around the Samaritan Pentateuch. So
let me
why
tell
not?
you one thing I like about it, though.
Go
Now,
ahead.
one thing that I think is very interesting about the Samaritan approach, and that is that very early, the Samaritan group recognized that the 10 words are connected to one other body of material, and that is the blessing and the curse. And it could be that in their attempt to connect the 10 words with the blessings and the curses, the ceremony at
Hmm.
Ebal and Grizim, maybe they remembered that there was a connection there,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
and what they're trying to do maybe is recall that memory. That's just a guess. I mean, I don't
No,
know.
no, but yeah, that's fair enough.
Yeah.
Now we really ought to, before we move on from that, we ought to read it as it appears in the Samaritan Pentateuch. What is the 10th commandment in the Samaritan Decalogue?
Let me see. I don't have that handy, but let me see if I can pull that
I
up
thought for
quickly.
sure you would have it right in front of you there, Ross.
No, I should have. I really should have.
I
Samaritan,
don't have a copy of it.
Samaritan. 1 second. No, that's what I get. I mean, I should definitely. let's.
G'day, Lynn. Lynn says this is all very interesting. I'm
Yeah.
glad.
Okay.
Let me see here. Oh,
Yeah,
everybody's here.
I'm looking for a version of it in English that I could just read, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Okay, here it is. Here it is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now this is a Googled translation, so I'm not looking at the Hebrew. So please forgive me. It shall be. This is according to the Samaritan Pentateuch on this website. When your God will bring you to the Canaanite land which you're going to inherit, you shall set yourself up great stones and plaster them with plaster. You shall write on them all the words of this law. It shall be when you are passed over the Jordan that you shall set up these stones which I command you this day in Mount Gerizim. There shall you build an altar to Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, an altar of stones. You shall lift up no iron tool on them, Jono. You should build an altar of Yahweh, this translation has, your God of uncut stones, and you shall offer burnt offerings thereon to Yahweh your God, and you shall sacrifice peace offerings and shall eat there, and you shall rejoice before Yahweh your God. The mount before the Jordan, behind the way of the going down of the sun in the land of the Canaanites who dwell in the Arava, over against Gilgal, beside the oaks of Moreh, against Shechem. Wow.
That is a lot of
That's a lot of
um,
commandment there.
that's a
And
lot of word there. Yeah, I was just about to say, but you know what? You know what? Something pops into my head as you read that, and I'm just trying to piece this together. And maybe this is a distraction. You tell me, but doesn't it say somewhere at the end of Deuteronomy, or is it the beginning of Joshua, that it must be the beginning of Joshua, that he went and did exactly this, quote, as was commanded by Moses on the other side of the Jordan. Let me just
yeah,
check.
yeah.
Because it seems like, because you go, well, where exactly was that commanded specifically, like it reads there in the Samaritan Pentateuch? This is,
Well, and
Timothy
so
just said you piqued my interest, yeah.
remember Joshua 8 is
Mm,
Joshua 8 is where the ceremony takes place, which is called for in
yep,
Deuteronomy.
verse 30.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's right.
So at that time, Joshua built an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, on Mount Ebal, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the Israelites, as is written in the book of the teaching of Moses, an altar of unhewn stone upon which no iron had been wielded. They offered, sacrifices and so on and so forth. Now, where did Moses command that specifically? There's the question.
Yeah. Well, the only connection between Joshua 8, verses 30 and 32, 30 through 32, I think it is, and Deuteronomy is the only connection with that. And that's in Deuteronomy 11 at the end of
Hmm.
11 and Deuteronomy 27 at the beginning. And between those two, you
Mm.
almost have to read the end of 11, the beginning of 27 to get what's going on in Joshua chapter 8. So, what's fascinating, and scholars have proposed this, very few have caught it, but a few have, that it looks like somebody squeezed in all this disparate material from 12 to 26, which,
Hmm.
it's called the law book of Deuteronomy, if you will. But it interrupts the narrative between 11 and 27 very oddly.
Hmm.
Which, by the
At
way,
the expense of the blessings.
that's right. Which, by the way, is not in the Shapira manuscript. Not a teeny tiny bit
Hmm.
of chapter 12 through 26 appears in the Shapira's manuscript.
So
Uh,
many have speculated that this is Josiah's revised version,
yeah.
the Josiah revised version. Exodus chapter 20, verse 22. And if you make for me an altar of stones, do not build it with hewn stones upon which an iron tool has been wielded. There's that, but there's a lot more detail in
Oh,
Joshua chapter
yeah.
8 that
Yeah.
he seems to be fulfilling. So it's interesting that the Samaritan Pentateuch says, well, we can just, I'm assuming, write that into the text there so that to just make sure all bases are covered.
Uh,
Maybe.
one thing that's popped up in the questions, by the way, a lot of good questions and comments. Timothy Daly and Eric Nagel have both they started talking about when is the Samaritan Pentateuch compiled. And I was talking a little bit with Nehemiah Gordon when we did our interview. I don't know if this part ever made it to the public's viewing, which I'll look at later. But anyway, we talked a little bit about the dating of the Samaritan Pentateuch, and it depends on who you ask, right? So the Samaritans obviously have a very early date for the composition of the Samaritan Pentateuch, and they would say ours is the original and the Masoretic text deviated therefrom. And of course, the opposite would be the case if you talk to someone who was championing the Masoretic text. So, but I think that is a high level of debate, and it's more than we can get into now. But it certainly says that there are different versions of these sacred manuscripts, and we need to consider all of them and give them equal weight if we're trying to discern textual matters.
Timothy says, it makes me think of the account of Jesus and the Samaritan woman at the well. If I remember correctly, he sort of gives her a bit of a quiz.
Yeah.
What can you recall of the 10 words? Something to that effect for us. Is that right?
I'm trying to remember. I think
How do you read it?
Yeah, and they get into this debate. Your parents, your family, your ancestors worship on this mountain and so forth. John chapter 4, verse 20, Timothy says. So what we do have, though, is we do have clearly Shapira, the Shapira manuscript has 10, and the Samaritan Pentateuch has 10. All others, I would propose, have only 9, but they force 10 because of 3 clear references that they have to have 10.
That's
And
right.
I get it.
The reason why they can do that is because the division between the actual commandments or the words are not clear cut as they are in perhaps certainly the Moses scroll, the Shapira scroll, and also other recollections to recount the 10, such as Leviticus chapter 19. We're going to go there in just a minute, but before we do, we already mentioned that the reason why they have to divide it into 10 is because in 3 places in the Torah it says that there are 10, and you read those out. One of them, the first one that you read out, was Exodus chapter 34.
Right.
And Exodus chapter 34 contains an attempt to recall the 10 words, different to that of Exodus chapter 20. I'm curious.
Hey, that's a good point. That's a good point, Jono. One
Do we
of
know?
the 3, while you're turning there, one of the 3 places where Aseret HaDevarim, the 10 words, and it's translated in English as 10 commandments, one of only 3 gives us a list, and it does not match Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5. What is going on, Jono?
So this is the thing, and I'm wondering, in this attempt to recall the 10, are there actually 10? Are there 10 here? I mean, it begins by saying, the Lord said to Moses, carve 2 tablets, and do all the same things, and come up to me on top of the mountain. No one will come with you. So he carved 2 stone tablets, went up, there's a cloud, and so on and so forth, and it was all very grand. And then it begins with, you shall... Well, where does it begin, Ross? What verse? Is this...
Let's look.
You must not worship any other god. I'm on verse... oh, boy. The prohibition against idolatry is really long.
Yeah.
He said, verse 10, he said, I hereby make a covenant before all your people. I will work such wonders, so on and so forth. Mark the commandments you this day, and I will drive out before you all the bad people. Beware of making covenants with the inhabitants of the land. They'll try and snare you into their idolatry. You should smash down their altars and their posts and don't worship their gods, so on and so forth. don't do any of that. Verse 17, you shall not make molten gods for yourself.
Wait. Let me jump in. Verse 15. I'm with you. I don't get this
Mm-hmm.
yet either, but I don't know where to start. It's like jumping rope, and you don't know when to jump in. So
Yeah, it is. It's like that, yeah.
But verse 15, you must not make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land. Verse 14, you must not worship any other God. Oh, there we
Mm-hmm.
go. So maybe that's kind of like Commandment 1.
It is, and it goes to verse 17. It concludes with that idea that that theme, you shall not make molten gods for yourselves. And then 18 goes into, you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread. So here's number 2.
Yeah.
Number 3, verse 19, perhaps. Every issue of the womb is mine. You got to redeem it by breaking the neck of anyway.
Break a donkey's neck, I think.
Right, better do that. And verse 21, 6 days you shall work. Okay, so here's the Sabbath is number 3. Number 4, verse 22, you shall observe the Feast of Weeks. Got to do that. 3 times a year, says the pilgrimage feast. Verse 25, what are we up to? Is this 4 or 5? This is 5?
I don't know. Jono, I'm still thinking about why God would want you to break a donkey's neck.
You shall not offer the blood of my sacrifices with anything leavened. 20, are you counting? First fruits. Oh, you shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. There's 7. And the Lord your God said to Moses, write down these. Well, he's finished.
Okay, but look, now read this carefully. Read this verse carefully.
And the Lord said to Moses, write down these commandments. This is verse 27. In accordance with these commandments, I will make a covenant with you and with Israel. So,
keep going.
And he was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. He ate no bread and drank no water, and he wrote down, now who's he? He wrote down on the tablets the terms of the covenant, the 10 commandments, Ross.
There's our verse. So whatever he's telling us all about these, if you can't redeem it, break the donkey's neck, you're going to keep the Feast of Weeks, you're going to do all these things and do all those things.
Its mother's milk.
And then it says, these are the 10, and he wrote them down. Now, I know a lot of people would say,
Ross, not just these are the 10, not just these are the 10 he wrote them down, but these are the 10 with which I make a covenant.
I know.
Between you and with Israel. This is it. This is definitely, okay, go ahead.
Look back at 34:1. Just one more point on this. Look at 34:1.
Mm-hmm.
The Lord said to Moses, carve 2 tablets of stone like the first, and I will inscribe upon the tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you shattered. Then he goes on and he does verse 4, he makes the tablets, etc. So this is supposed to be a making of the 10 commandments, just like the set that we had before.
That's right.
And it's also the corresponding verse is supposed to be tied to, what would we say, Deuteronomy 10. So Deuteronomy 10 is supposed to equal Exodus 34. Kind of a strange, and they don't agree, but anyway.
That's it. But then now you got a white space here, but verse 29, so Moses came down from Mount Sinai, and as Moses came down from the mountain bearing the 2 tablets of the pact. So this is absolutely claiming to be the 10 words. Moses was not aware that the skin of his face was radiant. Then you've got the whole glowing face story here and all of that. All right, so that is Exodus chapter 34, and apparently it insists that which we just very, very quickly skimmed over can be divided into 10. And again, when you really got to pay attention, I suppose, to dissect that and make a good job of it. But the other attempt at recalling the 10 words, as I already mentioned, would be Leviticus chapter 19. Can we go there briefly?
Absolutely.
All right. Now, this one is a lot easier. And the reason why it's easier, Ross, is because it does have divisions by way of a signing off of God on each commandment.
Right.
It begins, okay, this is easy. Okay, so the Lord spoke to Moses, verse 1. Speak to the whole Israelite community and say to them, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord, your God, am holy. You shall each revere his mother and his father and keep my Sabbaths. I, the Lord, am your God. I, the Lord, am your God. And he signs off, or the writer of this particular text has God signing off on each of these particular commandments, thereby clearly dividing them, and we can count them. So there's this one here, and this one happens to conflate revere mother and father and keep my Sabbaths plural as the first. The next one, do not turn to idolatry or make molten gods for yourselves. I am the Lord your God. There's number 2. Number 3, when you sacrifice an offering of well-being to the Lord, sacrifices, so that it has all of these details here. Where
Wait,
does it have?
let
Go
me
ahead.
let me tell you something cool about this. I didn't know
Go
this.
on.
I learned this on the Torah.com. If
Great
you
website.
read from 5 to 8,
Mm.
that's a commandment that's talking about sacrifice. And you know what's interesting about it compared to the others?
Go ahead.
God doesn't sign off on it.
He doesn't, and there's the white space between on either side of that.
So what does that
But
mean? Is this doesn't go
is
with
this
the rest
added?
of them?
Is it added in? When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the way to the edges, and so on and so forth. And then you shall leave some for the poor and the stranger. I, the Lord, am your God. There it is again.
Yep.
You shall not steal. You shall not deal deceitfully or falsely with one another. You shall not swear falsely by my name, profaning the name of your God. I am the Lord. Again, we highlighted significant crossover between that commandment there and the Shapira scroll.
Yep.
You shall not defraud your fellow. You shall not commit robbery. The wages of the laborer shall not remain with you until the morning. You shall not insult the deaf or place a stumbling block before the blind. You shall fear your God. I am God. There's a sign off again.
Yep.
You shall not render an unfair decision. Do not favor the poor or show defense to the rich. Judge deference to the rich. You judge your kinmen fairly. Do not deal basely with your countrymen. Do not profit by blood of your fellow. I am the Lord. There's the sign off again. And verse 17, you shall not hate your kinsfolk, or you shall not hate your brother in your heart. Reprove your brother, but incur no guilt because of him. You shall not take revenge or bear a grudge against your countrymen. Love your fellow as yourself. I am the Lord. And it goes on. Do we want to go through all of these? But
No,
or should
because
we pause there?
yeah, I think that's a good place to rest. But at the same token, Jono, these are all important because it appears to be an attempt to recall what are those covenant rules. And
Mm-hmm.
you do see similarities. You do see very marked similarities between these different versions of the 10 words. And, because otherwise you have to say, well, why are they repeated? Do you
Mm.
need the repetition of these laws in all these places, or are they just
Mm.
various sources? How do we get why do we have Leviticus 19, which concurs in other places with other passages? I mean, I don't know. What's the answer to that?
Well, speaking of concurrence, we stopped at verse 17, and verse 17 happens to be exactly where we find ourselves in the Moses scroll. And so the 10th commandment, not the 11th commandment, Ross. You showed me that you were on the front page of a magazine. Can you with Dave and Patty Tyler? Can you, before we go further,
Yeah,
can you tell me about that?
yeah. Let me tell you that story real quick.
Mm.
So we're looking. The Tylers and I, a few others, are looking for the Shapira manuscript. And the last place that the Shapira manuscript strips were seen was in a place called Burton-on-Trent, England.
Mm.
So Patty, a lot of the planning of the trip fell to Patty. She just took it and ran with it. She's probably the most detailed
Mm.
researcher I know. I mean, so she's digging into this thing. So she tracks down a couple of things. She finds us a perfect place to stay while we're in Burton-on-Trent. Get this, the place is called Sinai House.
Mm-hmm.
It's in I mean, why would you not stay at Sinai House?
Of course.
Turns out this place is it's got all kind of history. Supposedly, it's the most haunted
Yes.
place in England. Really, I remember calling Bridget that night saying, "Hey, this place is supposed to be haunted." She said, "Ross, I know how you sleep. Just close your eyes. If there are ghosts playing badminton and jumping all over, you'll never wake up. So just get to sleep." Anyway, it was weird, but it was cool. So we go there and we meet this is going to lead to a point. We meet with a guy, a researcher by the name of David Atkins. David has a theory that the Shapira manuscripts, the strips, were indeed the property of Philip Brooks Mason. We know that. And he suggested that when Philip Brooks Mason died, his wife put the strips in the casket with him, and he was buried. So we go to see him. And while we're there, here we go. You ready? Drum roll. This appears after we leave in a tabloid. Experts believe secret grave holds biblical treasure older than the Dead Sea Scrolls. Buried in Burton, exclusive by Mike Luckley, pages 4 and 5. The lost 11th commandment. Look at that. Look, so there's this in this picture. That's obviously me and Dave and Patty. And they snapped our picture. There we are in front of the Sinai house. And
that's the most haunted house behind you there.
And look, it's a weird little place too. It's the medieval monks live there, and they did all kind of weird they did little monkish things, like they had bloodletting and all kind of secret ceremonies.
I'm telling you, Ross, if it wasn't for the Catholics and the monks, we would have no horror movies. We'd have no horror movies of value whatsoever. So we have a lot to thank for them.
That's right.
And it doesn't surprise me then that the house is the most haunted. In fact, I think there was a ghost waving from the window behind you.
It might have been. It might have been. And so we go there. Now, it's interesting. Look at the title of that article one more time. This is the key point here. Buried in Burton, the lost 11th commandment. So this is the story we kind of kicked off with. Everyone said that the Shapira manuscript had 11 commandments early on because of one newspaper article. I have an article. I'm going to put the link in the description of this video. The article on my academia page is called Did Shapira's Manuscript Contain 10 or 11 Commandments? Almost at the outset, the first newspaper press that hits on Shapira's manuscript in London, a guy a reporter makes a comment. Here's what he says. Let's see. A new version. Let's see. Yeah, here it is. This is in a title. The title is called A New Version of Deuteronomy. Appeared 3 August 1883 in the Jewish Chronicle. Reporter says this. It need scarcely be stated that if this turns out to be correct, these pieces of leather will possess a high value, not only in money, but also in a literary sense, for they contain some curious variations in the reading, among which we have an extra commandment, which is, thou shalt not hate your brother in your heart. And then I write, the claim that this manuscript contained an extra commandment has been repeated, and I give all the examples, or a lot of them. But what they miss, most early 18th, 19th century writers, as well as modern times, is they miss the follow-up paragraph where it says, it mentions an extra commandment, which there is an extra commandment, but it's not 11, it's the number 10. So listen to what the writer went on to say. By joining the first and second commandments into one, says this writer in 1883, this becomes the 10th in the Phoenician version. So there are only 10. It's don't hate your brother in your heart. We find that word also in in Leviticus 19.
That we just read that, Leviticus chapter 19.
That's right.
Again, in the Shapira, just to point out, everyone's probably well aware, but like Leviticus 19, the Moses scroll signs off each commandment specifically, so that we know that there are exactly 10. And it is, the 10th is do not hate your brother in your heart.
That's right. Yeah, it truly is it's fascinating. If people, I know we've gone through a lot over the last, I think 12 or 13 weeks now, but this this is truly a remarkable study that I encourage everyone. We'll continue. I think we have another class at least that will discuss this next week, sort of a wrap up, pulling it all together maybe. Is that right? Is that what you want to do? Or you want to bounce
You
in a
can do
second?
it.
Okay.
Why not?
Look, I wanted to hold this up. In fact, I have a graphic for this. This book, let's do it this way. The 11th Commandment. All right. So this is a fiction book by Mary F. Burns, and it's based at least in part on my book, The Moses Scroll. But she's a fantastic writer. If you're a fiction fan, and you kind of like what I've done, but you prefer a writer who's more fiction based, read Mary Burns's book because it's quite fascinating. And she called it the 11th Commandment. Notice the manuscript, the Shapira manuscript on the cover with a little blood splatter. She took liberties that I can't take, because I'm more historical and so forth. And she admits that, but nonetheless, anyway, the 11th Commandment. But there is no 11th Commandment, Jono. Stop saying 11th Commandment, people, unless you're a fiction writer. And
far more accurate to say that Deuteronomy and Exodus only have 9. You have 10 in the Samaritan Pentateuch, as we just said, but you have 10 in the Moses Scroll, and it seems to flow. I love the Decalogue of the Moses Scroll, and it does. Leviticus chapter 19, verse 17 concurs and clearly lifts from there, trying to recollect the 10 words. I would argue, and no, it's a good thing. Now, while we're there, the blessings and the curses of the because of course that's another thing that the Moses Scroll has. It has corresponding blessings and curses, and the cursing of this particular word, if you like, is just the same. Cursed is the man who hates his brother in his heart. All the people shall respond and say, Amen. The blessing is, blessed is the man who loves his neighbor. Interestingly, I think this is. Yeah, I think this is.
That's right.
This is it. Blessed is the man who loves his neighbor. I'm just curious, Ross, before we go, and I know you can probably tell me this. In Leviticus chapter 19, where it says kinsman, obviously the kinsfolk, that's referring to brother, but it goes on in verse 18, you shall not take revenge or bear a grudge against your countryman. Is countryman neighbor? What is that word there?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I'd have to. Yeah. What is it? Leviticus 19:18?
19:18.
Yeah. Keep going. I'll look it up, but I think it is. I think it is neighbor.
And if it is, it continues on saying, "Love your fellow." So, countryman and fellow, love your fellow as yourself. I am the Lord, and there's the sign off there. So, just another blatant similarity between the two.
Yeah. Let's see. You shall love your neighbor. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Makes sense?
Yeah. Very much so. Yeah.
There
Love
you
your neighbor as yourself, Ray Con. You brought this up before, and I guess you cut me some slack, but I'll go ahead and bring it up. One thing that quite a few people have said, and Jonathan Clawins is a professor, university professor out of Boston University, and he's a scroll guy, but he has also involved himself several times in the Shapira case, the modern resurgence of the Shapira case. And Clawins wrote an article sometime back. I don't know if I have it printed out, but the basic gist of it was this, that Shapira forged it, and he forged it because we see telltale signs that he forged it because, get this, he was a Christian. He worshiped at Christ Church, and at Christ Church, they displayed the 10 words on the wall. So he said, you mix all that together, voila, you get a Christian document, which he's calling the Shapira manuscript a Christian document. You get all these magical things, and there you go. So you go, why, Mr. Clawins, Professor, sir, would you call this a Christian document? And one of the reasons is because it has this whole idea of love your neighbor as yourself, but it doesn't have love your neighbor as yourself. It has close, it has don't hate your brother in your heart is in the 10 words, and in the blessing, blessed is the one who loves his neighbor. But if you conflate those two, now you still can't say that it's a Christian document. This blows me away. Here's what blows me away.
Go ahead.
It's when people, it's like those, and this is not the way I feel, but it's like the Jews can't possibly have something as beautiful as love your neighbor. That's a Christian teaching. This is the mentality of a lot of people. And you go, what? Look, Jesus may have made it popular, but he certainly didn't come up with it. It goes back to Leviticus 19.
As we have it here.
And time again, we see this, but that charge comes up. So I wrote an article. I responded to Clauen's article on my academia page, and I basically said, it's because he said that Edon and I didn't recognize all these facts. And my response was, oh, we recognized them. We just didn't find them of any value. We don't see what you see in it. So anyway, it's not a Christian document. The original manuscript that Moses wrote, to say that he doesn't have the capacity to express the love of God and the love of neighbor is to say what? I mean, it sounds pretty bad.
It's a funny thing too, to say that it's a Christian document, because the Moses, and we've said this many times, the Moses Scroll is a complete prescription, if you like. It has 10 words and corresponding blessings and curses. The idea is that if you do it, you will be blessed, and by the divine hand, if you like. I mean, if anything, this particular commandment demonstrates that, because who would know whether or not you hate your brother in your heart but God?
Yeah.
And if you do so, then you incur cursing as a result of that. And if you do not, then you will incur blessing. And but as we point out, it has the commandments, it has the words, and then it has the corresponding blessing and curses. There is no sacrifice whatsoever. There's no necessity for sacrifice whatsoever.
Yeah.
And by dispelling sacrifice, then all of Christian theology just goes away, because
not just Christian
theology, but for the sake of this particular point, to say that it's a Christian document that takes away the idea that the sacrificial system is in fact a thing, then there is no Christian theology anymore. That Jesus came to be the ultimate sacrifice and sacrificed his life, as a bouncing off the platform that is the sacrificial system, and so on and so forth. You take that away, and Christianity just goes away as well. So he doesn't think too deeply about this. If that was if Shapira was in fact a forger and concocted this particular version of the Decalogue and the narrative that around about it, in order to favor Christianity in some way, he's really done a disservice.
Well, not only that, he certainly worked himself in circles. There are a lot of things that he could have, would have, should have done differently, better, if he were a forger, and there are things that he could not have possibly known, and we can get into some of that. But I tell you what I'd like to do next week, Jono, is sort of as a crown to this study on the 10 words of all these ancient documents, let's just come out and talk about the 10 words and the corresponding blessings and curses of the Shapira manuscript, and talk about how all of that goes together to form the nucleus of this document. And maybe we can talk about that and why it lends to the authenticity thereof. And, we can go through that. And I can even post that document also and give it to people ahead of time so that they can have that document and study it. Because ultimately, I think what people might want to do is replace the version that they have in their home with maybe the version that comes from this manuscript, because it depends. Do you use Exodus and Deuteronomy? They don't agree. I mean, which one do you
Mhm.
put on your refrigerator magnet? So
Mm.
maybe that's what I need to do, is get some refrigerator magnets
There
made
we go.
with
I'd
the
like one of those.
10 words. I'll bring one to you in
There you go.
Israel if I can get them made in time.
When we go to on the Tanakh tour, kicking off on the 31st of October in Cairo, working our way through Egypt, going on a Nile River cruise.
Wow. Yeah,
My
baby.
goodness. Flying up to the Sinai Peninsula and checking out the traditional Mount Sinai, hiking all the way up there and then crossing over. We intend to cross the Aqaba into Aqaba,
Yep.
Jordan, and then Wadi Rum and Petra, Wadi Mujib, Mount Nebo, and so on and so forth. And then on the 12th of, where are we, November? Good
Yep.
heavens, Ross. We're going into Israel.
Look, do you
And
realize that people that do that whole thing with us, they're going to be able to say they went to the Red Sea,
mhm,
the Dead Sea,
yeah,
and the Med Sea, because we'll get the
that's right.
Mediterranean in too. Can you
That's
imagine?
it.
Who would not? This is what I keep getting back to. Who does not want to go? And I know some people just say, "Oh, I'd love to go." Look, this thing is priced so well that I don't. I mean, most
Oh, well,
people.
it's not going to be this cheap next year, is all I can say,
No,
Ross.
I know it, but it is this year. So
Yeah.
we encourage people, if there's any way you can go, please go. Please
Yep.
go
Yep.
with us.
There's a little bit of room, little bit of room on the first leg of the tour, which is Egypt, Jordan. Second leg of the tour, Israel. We've got some room there. You can do one. You can do both. If you do both, you will incur $100 combination discount. But get in quick, because it's not long before we kick off, and we're nailing down reservations as we speak. So
Yep.
get your deposit down at tanaktours.com, TANAKH, tanaktours.com. And we will go out on this, Ross. Here's a nice verse to go out on, just in regards to the 10th commandment as it appears in the Moses scroll. I just want to read from Jeremiah, your favorite prophet, my favorite
Love
prophet,
Jeremiah.
chapter 17, verse 10, which says, I, the Lord, search the heart. I test the mind to give to each person according to his ways, according to the results of his deeds.
What do you do with not of works lest any man should boast, Jono? What do you
Oh,
do with it?
I don't know what we're going to have to do with that.
Hey,
That
look,
doesn't.
okay, wait, before
All
you
right,
go. Now you got a last word, and I have a last word. This
go
is
on.
so this Shabbat, this
Mm.
Saturday
Oh,
morning,
yeah.
10:30 a.m. Central Time in the States,
Mm.
on this very YouTube channel where you are at right now. You don't even have to look for it.
Mm.
You come here Saturday, 10:30 a.m. The class that follows up, my last week was the Ghost Writers Guild.
I watched that. It was excellent.
And it talked about the idea that evidence comes forward from a reading of the text that there are hands other than Moses involved in the
Mm.
Pentateuch. Okay.
Very good.
Now, now you have to understand what Seth and I are doing. This Saturday, Seth has digitally remastered a class that fits perfectly in this spot. Something that I
Mm.
did not too long ago, but I guarantee you, people, they can't keep up anyway. They don't even know. I could just act like it's brand new, but I'm not. I'm telling you, I'm doing it because. Why am I doing that? Because we needed just a little bit of breathing room, because the next week,
Mm.
Saturday, I'm starting a new study. You want to hear what it's on? Guess
What's that?
guess what prophet I'm jumping into next? Just like I did with Jeremiah, but this one's going to be a 10-part series that I'm going to do on Isaiah. All right. So,
Ooh, you're going to kick
yeah,
off on Isaiah finally.
yeah, I'm going to jump in both
You
feet.
reckon you can do that in only 10?
Well, I can, because here's the question.
Yeah.
What do you do? Do you do Isaiah 1 through 66, or do you break it down? There's a lot of discussion about
Mm.
speaking of different hands. Now, I know people, I used to hate to even hear this, but
Yeah.
let me just suffice it to say, I'm going to deal primarily with Isaiah 1 through 39 in this series.
Mm-hmm.
And then Maybe we'll do chapter 40 through 66.
All right, very good. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, look, but you can't miss this Saturday. I'm going to be online, even though this is going to be a digitally remastered. I'm going to be online because I think it's perfect timing to put this class in the run. And then afterwards, I'm going to do a Zoom call. Everyone who's there can log in and participate in the Zoom call with me. Look, the last couple of weeks, Jonah, we've had 50 people, roughly 40 to 50 people in the Zoom call. And those are really fun and nice, and I think everybody likes it. So,
all right, digitally remastered, Ross. It's amazing. Seth is doing a great job. I want to see Seth. Maybe he can do one of these. When they take using AI, take Arnold Schwarzenegger's face and voice and superimpose it over. Maybe you can do that with some of your presentations. That'd be fun. I bet you'd get a lot of views then. All right, my friend.
Right. Hey, man,
Just
look,
an
always
idea.
good talking to you. Thanks, Jono. Thanks, everyone, for listening. And I can't wait to be in Israel with some of you. I know that some of you who are on the chat tonight are going to be with us in Israel. So the rest of you, if there's any way you can join us, if you've been before, even if you've been with Jono, if you've been with Ross, look, nothing like this one. We haven't done Egypt, Jordan, Israel.
This first time Egypt, so we're really looking forward. And speaking of which, Karen, don't go away. I'm going to message you. I want to ask you a question about that. All right, you guys, this time next week.
All right.